If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, and your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands.
In less than 10 years, Louisiana has gone from a national leader to dead last in children's access to mental health services.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, and you really want to show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands.
Beginning in 2002, Louisiana's children were served by a nationally recognized program called Early Childhood Services and Supports. Young children and their families benefited from wraparound services that paired early childhood mental health experts with community resources. This wraparound approach gave the child the very best start from birth to age 5. They received services such as home visiting programs, nutritional benefit programs, and even housing repair programs, allowing families to focus on both the mental and developmental health of their very young children. The program was hailed as a national success, and in 2010 was featured in a New York Times article that focused on a family who struggled with getting adequate care for their son before they were referred to wraparound services in the Acadiana area. The services provided to parents of these very young children also benefited their older children by reducing the stressors on the family. Since the elimination of the wraparound program, Early Childhood Services and Support Louisiana has gone from a national leader to last in the nation in providing access to mental health care for children, according to a report by Mental Health America. 62% of all Louisiana children aged 3 to 17 who have been diagnosed with a mental illness or condition by not receiving mental health treatment or counseling. There's also been a dramatic rise in the number of children in the child welfare system since 2011, further aggravated by the impacts of multiple natural disasters and the pandemic, which have created uncertainty and chaos for many Louisiana families. Here's a look at the numbers.
Gavin's here today. Gavin's here today. Hi, hello, good morning. Gavin's here today.
Now it's time to bring back wraparound services.
Hi, hello, good morning. Camry's here today.
I was involved with the Early Childhood Supports and Services program when it first was begun in Louisiana in around 2003 with a partnership with the state and LSU Medical School and Tulane Department of Psychiatry. I had been trained in infant mental health and so was well aware of the considerations and concerns for families with young children and the need for having services that ECSS provided, which included these wraparound services with case managers and other supportive services through the state, such as child protection services, food stamps, housing services, disabilities considerations, early Head Start, early steps, a lot of different programs that were supportive of families with young children were involved with ECSS.
We are big proponents of evidence-based programs, and one of the best evidence-based programs that Louisiana has ever had was the Early Childhood Services and Supports Program, what we call ECSS. That program showed demonstrable results for families. It was successful at lowering the dependency of children who were taking psychotic medication. It got them off of those medications. It helped families be more resilient and stronger. It had parent training components. All of these, the evidence shows us, makes families more resilient. And when families are more resilient, children are more resilient. Adversity is going to happen, whether it's from natural disasters or pandemics. But in Louisiana, we can make our families stronger so that when these things happen, people are more able to cope with the situation, cope with the loss of property or having to make amends with their family or anything like that. And so we are really focused on this evidence-based program that really showed demonstrable results for families.
The whole idea of ECSS was really to provide the supports that struggling families who were dealing with issues such as mental illness, substance abuse, poverty, domestic violence, were able to have the right interventions.
The way that ECSS was most successful was with the wraparound services. So when a family came in because they were referred for either a developmental or a mental health issue with a child, we looked at the whole family. What does the family need? Is there housing issues that need to be remedied? Is there food access issues? Is there health insurance or Medicaid issues that need to be remedied? And because we had this really strong wraparound services program that tied into community supports, so if you were in your local community, it was tied into those local organizations that were already serving families. It helped integrate those people into those services and get them the supports they needed to thrive.
Early Childhood Supports and Services was a model program envied nationally because it provided comprehensive supports and services to families of young children in need, serving hundreds of children every year in Louisiana who previously had had no services whatsoever. And since it's gone away, sadly, those families often have nowhere to turn other than turning to sources that are not really prepared to deal with, don't have the expertise and experience in dealing with the problems of young children and their families. And so children either get no treatment or they get treatment that's ineffective and potentially dangerous, such as medications. So the advantages of early childhood supports and services is really being able to provide a comprehensive response to the needs of young children and their families. And in the absence of providing evidence-based interventions for the problems that young children may have, they're left with alternatives that are really unsatisfactory, either no treatment whatsoever or treatment that's inappropriate or ineffective.
What we know about developing the whole child is that children don't develop in isolation. You don't develop language and then hearing and then walking and all these different things. And so if we think about how young children really develop, we know that we have to develop the whole child, whether it's their social emotional needs, how they think, how they learn, how they speak. And so it's really critically important that we think of them as whole little people, not just as different segments of the different types of development that they do.
What we've learned about brain development is that the brain in the first few years of life is highly susceptible to the experience that the individual has. And there are two ways that the good news about that is the child has favorable experiences, their brain development proceeds in a favorable way. But the two-edged sword is if the child develops in unfavorable circumstances, then their brain development can be compromised. One of the ways it can be compromised is by not receiving adequate input at crucial periods. So what this slide illustrates, on the left-hand side is the electrical activity of a brain of a child who's receiving adequate stimulation, and next to it, the brain of a child who's receiving inadequate stimulation, and there's simply less electrical activity there. So red and yellow represent more electrical activity, blue and green represent less electrical activity, and you can see the contrast. Another way that a brain can be compromised is by repeated exposure to threatening or violent experiences. And when the child experiences those kinds of events, then their brain can become hypercharged with its stress response, and over time that begins to have deleterious effects on the child's health and well-being. Human infants, of course, are highly dependent on caregivers to look out for them, and even prenatally the fetus experiences the mother's life. So as the mother is affected by a whole bunch of challenges and stressors, so will the fetus be affected. And the same thing after birth. When the mother is affected by all sorts of stressful events or challenges, the baby is going to be affected as well. And that's why effective treatments for young children involve working with parents and through parents to help the baby. In the absence of those kinds of effective interventions, what children are left with often is being treated with medication, which is inappropriate, or simply no treatment at all.
The best way to develop the whole child really is through play and making sure that they have experiences with caregivers that are, have rich language and are responsive and that are helping to educate them as well. And we know that young children's main work is through play, and that's how we develop whole children.
When I was a practicing pediatrician for almost 20 years, we had the ECSS program in the early parts of that, whereby we could refer children to that program, especially in the first 5 years of life. It's basically a screening, evaluation, referral, and treatment program with community-based behavioral health providers. And really the whole goal of that program was to put structure in place and services in place for those families such that those kids would develop appropriately, especially those at risk for not doing so and maybe at risk for mental health conditions. And the big goal was really to have them prepared for school. Basically the program helped with school readiness so the kids could mainstream, not have any remediation, and hit kindergarten ready to learn.
One of the success stories that comes to mind with the wraparound services for ECSS was a young woman who was 18 years old and had a 2-year-old child. So bear in mind, she had this baby when she was 16. She did not have a support person. Her mother had died when she was 10 years old, and she lived with her father, who worked all the time to support the household. And so she really did not have any guidance in her parenting. And at 2 years old, developmentally, appropriately, this young boy was having some tantrums, having some frustration in his interaction with his mother, and she would put him in a stroller to calm him down and walk the sidewalks of her neighborhood for a couple of hours. That was her way for managing this situation. Of course, she had dropped out of high school actually soon after she got pregnant, so at age 16. So she really was not looking at any goals in her life or reaching any sort of productive place with this child and being able to provide a better life for him. So when she came to ECSS, she was able to get some services, not only to help her deal with the parenting concerns, being taught some skills and developmentally how this child was growing so that she could help normalize some of his behavior and respond to him effectively, but also she was able to get help to go on with her GED and complete her high school diploma and go ahead and start a job, making a better life for herself and her child. Also improved her own depression and anxiety, which was related to the death of her mother when she was 10 years old. So overall, she received so many services that made her a better parent, that her child's health and happiness and mental wellness was then assured, including hers, so that they could have a much better life together.
Families in Louisiana have really had not just a difficult 2 years, but really going back to 2016 when we had the catastrophic flooding in Louisiana. We've had disaster after disaster, and really no area of the state has been unscathed. And then we had the COVID pandemic. Schools were shut down, early learning centers were shut down, parents, some cases, lost employment. Food access was at an all-time insecure status. And so, you know, we see all of these effects happening, just sort of compounding each other. And we've seen this in more people reaching out for mental health needs, more people dying by suicide, more people just not being able to cope with all of these stressors that are happening all at once. And we're also, because we had a long period where we didn't have eyes on a lot of children in the usual spaces, we're seeing a lot more children enter the child welfare system now that people do have eyes on them and see those issues that are coming up.
When we opened our doors 16 years ago, compared to today, what we're seeing now as it relates to mental health issues is, again, children not being able to self-cope, children not knowing how to self-regulate, children having more impulse control issues, children and families not knowing how to cope. It is not just about the child. It is really about what we're seeing in family systems. And parents asking for help. Are you seeing this behavior exhibited at school? Because this is what we're seeing at home. I'm nervous about these actions that my little person is taking. He's biting more, and he's older. He is not using his words, and he's a 3-year-old. So when we're used to seeing little people say no, because at 2 they say no. But now what we're seeing is that they're not saying no, but they're using their physical bodies more than they were using their words. In the early childhood classrooms, things that we're seeing in early childhood classrooms that relates to mental health are children that are really needing more cuddles, children that are coming in and really cranky, like separation anxiety, kids that need more time to decompress, more time to really get to go into the classroom and be at play. Children that need more time or extra help with expressing their feelings. What we're doing more now is feeling walls. How do you feel today? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you angry? Expressing to them what anxious means. Talking to them about how their other friends feel. What things that they're doing that might make their other friends feel happy or sad, or you hurt your friend. Also trying to get little people out of their shells. We've seen more children reserved, so they may stay in a center a little longer or might not want to transition to another center or engage with friends. So helping them engage with friends, make friends, helping them understand what it is to be friendly to someone, to what it is to be a good citizen. What we are seeing in addition to that is also supporting parents through this. They're seeing the same things at home. She is not as open as she used to be. She doesn't play as much. She's really tired. What things should we be doing at home to help them come out of that? Or what things should we do at home to help them calm down? I have seen mental health issues in very young children that exhibit from children being really tired or really sleepy, needing extra support, more cuddles, children being very cranky and not having the words to say what's going on with them. I have seen children that are just quiet, that are more reserved, and we have also seen parents who don't know what to do. This is unusual for them. We are writing more unusual behavior reports where children were doing very on target milestones that now are, regressing or doing things differently.
The transition to parenthood is a challenging time, and for some people it can involve lots of difficulties and stresses. We know that somewhere between 10 and 20% of women will develop serious postpartum difficulties, especially depression, but also to some degree anxiety. And the problem is that those problems are often undetected, untreated. They don't get detected in obstetricians' offices, they don't necessarily get detected in pediatricians' offices, and yet the mother's having serious struggles with depression or anxiety in the postpartum period will affect her relationship with the baby and the baby's development. So it's really important that we have services in place to address those problems and get children started on the right kind of developmental trajectory.
I think we can see a loss in educational gains due to, health and mental health issues that children have. What we know fundamentally is that children's needs need to be met, and when their needs aren't met, that they tend to really seek out adults and people that can care for them. And when those needs aren't met by their very caregivers, we see breakdowns in social emotional issues. And so it's critically important that we help really focus on young children and what they need to make sure that those needs are met so that they can really take advantage of educational opportunities in early care and education centers.
It's known that intervening early in children's lives, especially in the first 3 to 5 years of life in terms of their behavioral health or mental health, we don't think about that too often, but infant mental health is a big thing. What we know now about the human brain and how it grows and develops, those first 3 to 5 years are when you get your biggest bang for the buck in terms of investing for long-term outcomes. We know now that in children that have lots of adverse events, that those events kind of get hardwired into their biology and it sets them up for lifelong disease much later in life. But we know that what happens with the genes is certain pieces of their genes get shortened, and those are sort of the biological clock of your cells. And if those telomeres of those genes get shortened in early childhood, you end up developing things like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, hypertension, those types of things earlier in life than if those children had had a more dynamic, ideal early childhood.
It's rural as rural can get. My understanding, it's one of the 3 river parishes, our neighboring parishes to the north and south, that are the most impoverished parishes, counties, if you want to call them, in the nation. We do have a local mental health clinic, but it is very limited in its ability to serve the community. We have to go out of town to Monroe or other places, bigger towns, to find facilities. I did see a lot of cases that involved domestic abuse and where there were children present. And since my tenure as sheriff, I haven't seen a decrease in that. So it's a pretty steady problem, okay? A lot of people are charged with children being present during domestic abuse batteries, which causes another problem because it requires incarceration. And a Gwynn's Law hearing when things like that happen. So it's definitely all related, okay? Family issues, mental health, addiction, homelessness, all those things, lack of jobs, all of that ties into what is poverty. I definitely saw in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a problem because there were so many people getting sick and people having to, take off work to meet the requirements of the CDC. So that was a problem. Some 30 years ago, when our mental health facility was up and operating on a maximum level, there seemed to be answers to what are we going to do with this person or that person or this child. There actually were counselors that would come in to the mental health facility and counsel with people. Now it's all pretty much out of town. We have to transport based on CDCs or PECs to Monroe, Freeport, other places. And so I'd like to see this mental health facility or another one like it spring up with very adequate professionals to man it and try to help find locations, maybe build a facility here. Lord knows we need the jobs.
In the city of Covington, we have seen a increase in mental health issues throughout the past couple of years, and for several reasons, due to the flooding in 2016 the recent pandemic and current pandemic, where people lost their jobs, people lost their businesses, kids had to stay home from school. It caused a lot of unnecessary strain to families, which ultimately led to mental health issues. We have seen an increase in domestic violence calls where children were present simply because a lot of families had to stay home during the pandemic. Unfortunately, it caused domestic violence issues while the children were there because the children weren't in school like they normally would be, which it's a sad thing, but unfortunately it's a reality. Well, it's a long-lasting impact when they see their parents fighting with each other in front of them, two people that are supposed to love each other and support the child. That has severe impacts on that kid and his or her mental health. A negative impact of the pandemic is that children do not have anything to do. And when they don't have anything to do, it encourages them to do the wrong things and get involved with the criminal element. And unfortunately, some of the older people in the criminal element use the children to engage in the crimes that they don't want to commit because they have a past or whatever, and they know that it'll be a easier or less of a sentence to the juvenile than the adult. So they use the children in that aspect. In my opinion, I believe families are struggling more than ever now for several reasons due to the recent events in Louisiana, whether it be from the flooding. So many people lost their homes in 2016, and then just a couple years later, they had the pandemic where they lost their jobs, where they lost their businesses. Their kids couldn't go to school. They couldn't afford daycare while they had to go try to work or make ends meet. So it's causing struggles and strife, amongst many families and most of the average, American family here in Covington.
There are parts of the state where you can't even find a social worker in North Louisiana and a lot of the rural areas. And if you are able to find a mental health professional, the waiting list to see this person is months and months before you can get in to get an appointment because there just aren't any providers. This has been a big issue, particularly in our rural areas, where if someone is exhibiting mental health issues, maybe they go to their doctor's office and they tell their doctor, I'm depressed. There is nowhere to refer them to for those types of treatments that they need from a mental health professional. We're seeing right now 42% of the children in the child welfare system are age 0 to 5. It's one of the highest percentages we've had in a very long time. And this is because families are really having a hard time coping. We've got the opioid epidemic, we've got folks without jobs. So we're really seeing a lot more kids of a younger age come into the child welfare system than we've ever seen before. This is alarming because, if with the right supports and services, those children don't enter the system and families can remain together.
Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, which encompass a whole array of deleterious experiences for young children, we now have clear and compelling evidence that affects the child's long-term well-being and can compromise not only mental health in adulthood, but also be related to increasing risk for serious health problems in adults. And that's why it's important that we intervene early and we intervene effectively to prevent the adverse consequences of ACEs. ACEs don't have to be destiny if we can provide needed services to people early in the child's experience.
I think, focusing on early childhood well-being is part of focusing on the whole child, and it absolutely will make a difference. We know that when young children have access to rich learning environments with really caregivers that are responsive and educating, that we see that the whole child is being developed. And that way we can make sure that they're ready to learn, change, and grow to the best of their ability over time.
What we've seen, what we've been able to do with managed care is try and offer case management to children and their families that are at risk for not developing properly or not getting the services they need in the early years of their life. So by connecting those Medicaid recipients and their families to our case managers, we too can help get them services to make sure they have the best possible outcome.
We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to use the federal funds that we got through the American Rescue Plan Act to implement and build the infrastructure for mental health for children in Louisiana. This is a really golden opportunity for us, and the funds that we can use are specifically earmarked. They can be used for mental health supports, and we've got them for a period of time. This is a really good opportunity for us to invest in the health and support of our families.
I think the state should bring back ECSS type wraparound services because it will improve the overall numbers in terms of high school graduation rates, increase productive citizens of this state who are actually working and employed and not just relying on support services. So what happens with these early childhood support services is with that intervention early, supporting that early brain development that we know is so critical to regulating people's emotions, playing well with others, improving the cognitive development. People can be successful adults, and we will have better citizens for the state of Louisiana. Plus, it doesn't cost a whole lot. When ECSS ended in 2013, the cost per child was $2,200 with all of the services ECSS was providing.
The availability of supports for families would increase the impact to our early learning centers, that we can readily say, hey, Mom, do you need, is there food scarcity? Is there mental health issues? Do you need rental assistance? Some of our parents have exhibited homelessness because of this rental issues that we've had. So what resources, because we're with these parents every day, sometimes these are the only meals that our little people have, right? And we also offer meals that we've had parents that say, hey, can we come in and have lunch with you guys, right? Now, we don't do that now because of the pandemic, but we do give them a to-go plate, right? So those are the things that we would be helpful. Financial assistance, rental assistance, mental health assistance. We need resources at our hands readily available so that we can provide to our families.
I think wraparound services are needed for young children in Louisiana is because we know that young children don't really learn or change or grow in isolation. And those wraparound services include infant mental health, social emotional supports, educational supports, and also nutrition and medical supports. And so when we can do those things, we know that young children are going to thrive. And we know for Louisiana to thrive, our little people have to thrive too.
The well-documented effects of adverse childhood experiences include depression, include anxiety disorders, include increased risk for suicide, increased risk for substance use and alcoholism, but also increased risk for cardiovascular disease, for liver disease, for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, for a whole variety of physical and medical problems that are increased in relation to early childhood experiences.
What we've seen is through the evidence that these wraparound services programs through ECSS costs about $2,000 per child per year to get them connected to these wraparound services. These are estimates. It can cost 10 times that to have that child in the child welfare system or even in the juvenile justice system. And so we can spend a little bit of money up front and really help change these children's lives, or we can spend a lot of money down the road and risk this person not becoming a thriving adult.
In my opinion, providing funding for mental health services in the state of Louisiana would do great for families because of all the recent events, the flood, the pandemic, everything that's going on in our country. It has caused mental health issues to our youth, and they don't know how to handle it. They don't know what to do. These are a bunch of new emotions and new problems that, you know, they're looking to their parents to figure out, but their parents don't even know what to do in this situation. So when they have mental health issues, who do they go to? They don't have anybody. They need that. And ultimately having funding and having something in place where they can lean towards and get the mental health services they need would be an excellent benefit to our community.
Madison Parish appreciates the opportunity to, be heard, okay, as far as mental health goes. We see a lot of homeless people here, and mental health goes along with that. And I truly believe we would be a better society if we would take care of our mental health and our homeless.
We would like to see the state implement the Early Childhood Services and Support Program and bring back these wraparound services for families that were so essential. We have this really great opportunity with these ARPA funds to spend this money. It's earmarked for mental health, and we can use these funds until we can figure out a state or federal source to continue the program after 3 years.
I do think it'd be a good idea to bring back the wraparound services for this population of children in Louisiana. We do have lots of children birth to 5 that are at increased risk for developmental outcomes, bad developmental outcomes, or not reaching their maximum potential. And by having this wraparound community-based service available, perhaps in partnership with the managed care plans and the behavioral health programs that they offer, we can get the kids the services they need and the families so that everybody benefits from the intervention.
This program was a nationally regarded program here in Louisiana in the early 2000s. It's time to bring it back.
It's time to build Louisiana's future. We can build a better future for Louisiana, one baby block at a time. Early childhood services help children become thriving adults who have careers and pay taxes. Louisiana becomes more attractive to employers who want an educated and healthy workforce. Families are better prepared to be successful families. It's time to bring back Louisiana's nationally recognized Wraparound Early Childhood Services and Supports Program.